Welcome to article review number 2. My name is Brad Averill. I'm excited to share this exciting research study with you today. The article I chose for the research review was titled "The Effects of Open and Smart Goals on Physical Activity and the Psychological Outcomes Over 1 Week in Multiple Method Study." The authors of this project was Rebecca Hawkins, Christian Swan, and Patricia Jackman. This was published in the International Journal of Sport and Exercise Psychology in 2025. And the citation will be listed below here and in the chat of our discussion board. The research questionnaires or hypothesis that was trying to be reached in this study was, in this multi-study paper, quantitative and qualitative methods were used to examine the effects of open and smart goals on physical activity and the psychological outcomes over a 1-week-long experiment in active and insufficiently active adults. So before we get into the research topic, I think it's really good to talk about the difference between an open goal and a smart goal. As an example, the open goal is see how well you can do in relation to increasing your physical activity over the next 7 days. Very broad. You're just kind of seeing how well you think you can do over the next 7 days, compared to a SMART goal where it will say something like try to increase your physical activity level by 10% to the previous week of activity you just recorded when you recorded 150 minutes of all forms of physical activity. That means you should try to achieve at least 165 minutes of physical activity over the next 7 days. Very specific, measurable, attainable, relative, and time-bound. For this article review, because of the length of the article review, it was like 28 pages. We're only going to talk about the first study that they covered in this research article. The study context: while studies have indicated the potentially valuable role of open goals, further research is required to understand the extent of how individuals respond to open goals in a more ecologically valid real-world setting when compared to SMART goals and a control condition. And number 2, how open goals function over time in comparison to SMART goals and a control condition. Let's talk about the methodology. There were 68 participants chosen for this research project. The participants did have to be between the ages of 64 years old and 18 years old. There were 2 groups of study participants. There was an active group, which had 30 people, 17 females and 13 males. And those participants participated in more than 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity, as were self-reported. The insufficiently active group had 24 females and 6 males, and those folks reported that they got less than 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity as a part of their regular routines. There were 8 participants that were removed due to moving too much for the insufficiently active group. There were folks that said, I don't move a lot, and then over the course of the 7-day trial, they just happened to move too much, which would have skewed the data. As I said a few slides ago, the research project was almost 28 pages long, and they were doing 2 different studies. The first study that we are going to be talking about today, they used the measures for the physical activity questionnaire at the very top, the physical activity questionnaire number 24, the feeding scale, and the rating of perceived exertion scale. Those are the 3 that we're going to talk about and show reports on throughout the process of this. The next few methodologies listed there below, those all dealt with the second part of the study that we're not covering today. In the first part of the study, they established 3 hypotheses they were trying to explore. The first hypothesis: open and SMART goals will result in greater physical activity when compared to a control condition. And the findings did not support this hypothesis. I found this very interesting. So taking part in this experiment increased the physical activity levels, regardless whether it was an open or a SMART goal. There wasn't a huge difference between those folks in the amount of physical activity in the open goal group or the SMART goal group. Hypothesis number 2, open goals will result in greater enjoyment for the insufficiently active participants compared to SMART goals. The research showed that less active participants reported greater enjoyment to having an open goal approach rather than a SMART goal approach. In the other group, the active participants, they enjoyed having more SMART goals compared to open goals. I thought that was very interesting. And then the third hypothesis, open goals will result in more positive responses on psychological variables that are linked to physical activity engagement for the insufficiently active participants. And the hypothesis did support these perceptions of confidence and performance in the insufficiently active participant. What was the relevance of this research study to coaching or behavior change? This article explicitly worked with using SMART goals and open goals that were related to physical activity that we could impart and use as coaches or health coaches as we go through our journey. Let's move on to strengths and limitations. Some of the strengths: there is a robust use of research methods and questionnaires. Like I said, in study number 1, we used 3 different research methods and questionnaires, but in the second part of the study, There were 7 or 8 different research methods that they used. Some other strengths, it was a smaller data for data collection. When I think about audience size, that can be both a strength and a limitation. You have a small group, it's easier to work with a smaller group, collect less amount of data. And they also used 3 different experimental groups throughout the course of this research study. The limitations, some of the data that was collected was self-reported, and there's questions and debates on how strict the participants were when they were actually counting their physical activity minutes. As a person that works in the community with physical activity all the time, our hardest thing to do is to figure out how often people move. Do we use steps? Do we use minutes? Do we use a heart rate? What do we use to demonstrate the amount of physical activity that folks are getting, and how do we report that? Another limitation of this study was it was only 1 week long, and the sample size was small, only 30 participants that took part in this project. Let's talk about the evaluation of design, the sample, and the validity. The design of this program was a 3-arm randomized controlled trial design. There were 68 participants that took part in this, and the validity, they used all validated measures to support the constructs that were being measured, so they were being measured accurately. What are the contributions to this field? This research extends the understanding of SMART and open goals for the purpose of increasing physical activity levels. Specifically, the findings highlight that open and SMART goals can elicit similar levels of physical activity across a 1-week experiment. It didn't matter that there was open goals or SMART goals, just having a goal increased that physical activity. And in contrast to previous research, this study also found that open and SMART goals were no more effective for increasing physical activity levels than a control condition, which could suggest that open and SMART goals are more effective in a lab setting compared to more real-world settings. That's really interesting stuff. My personal reflection, this study highlights that the goal type matters more for psychological experiences than actual activity levels over a short period of time, and that open goals might be particularly useful for enhancing motivation and positive psychological outcomes in less active individuals. Again, all we can do to make people more active, whether it's an open goal or a SMART goal, over a long period or over a short period, we have to help our clients use goals to reach their capacity. And the conclusion and future considerations, as coaches, we need to learn to work with diverse audiences who are motivated by different types of goal settings. Work closely with your client, learn what style of motivation they prefer, and use it. For future considerations, I think this study would be much more useful in the coaching community if it was carried out over the course of a year, not a week. Let's see what those long-term considerations and goals are, and what are the results of studying folks for a year using the different kinds of open or SMART goals. Thank you for your time today. Have a great day.